So hello everybody, and it's Dave here from Roads to Freedom. In my last video blog, talked a little bit about speed, particularly for people who have done recent marathons and ultra distance events and they want to develop a bit more speed. So we've talked a little bit about gradually introducing some fartlek training and some interval training, repetitions and the like. But before we do that, it's probably more important actually that we look at the way we move, okay? Because if we're just trying to get stronger and faster, and yet at the same time we're in a bad posture, that we don't move well, that we haven't got efficiency, myofascial efficiency, then all that speed training is going to be detrimental potentially, because we might just be consolidating bad patterns. So I know runners just like to run, but it is important to assess our movements and our posture generally, because modern living puts us in some very bad positions. So hunched over devices, sitting down most of our lives, including in the gym very often, wearing built up shoes so we can't feel the ground, we don't know where we are in space effectively, because we've got proprioceptors in our feet that give us that information, all of those things. So we need to make sure that we have full range of movement before we start trying to be stronger or faster. It just doesn't make sense to do otherwise. And you might think this is unchangeable, the way you run is the way you run, and that is simply not the case, because I've seen it in myself and lots of other people that have addressed their issues and have changed the way they move, changed the way they stand. And a lot of it is about controlling your environment, obviously, making sure you don't sit all day long, making sure you're not wearing shoes where you can't feel the ground at all, and all those other factors. Okay, nutrition also comes into this, because if your diet is high in sugars, you have more inflammation in your system, which will cause everything to be tighter and stiffer, and will obviously affect your movement. Same goes for sleep. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, then the system's not repairing itself, and again you can have the same problem, and the same actually with other things that go on in our brain, like stress. So stress releases cortisol, and again that causes inflammation in the system. So again, restriction, underperformance, injury risk. And if you then throw in another load of cortisol, a load of high intensity strength training or speed training, then you might just be making things worse rather than better actually. Although you might get some short-term benefits until you get injured or whatever. So so addressing first of all, the way I assess people is I look at their standing posture, because this tells me how they prefer to set themselves up in everyday life, and they're very often hunched over, rounded shoulders, feet pointed out like a platypus, all those kind of things. So we want to make sure that we can access all ranges of movement, and this is not just a question of hold your stomach in, pull your shoulders back, straighten your feet. It requires to be there's nothing wrong with those positions in themselves. The problem is that people cannot access any other positions, or they cannot access the opposite movements, or a full range of movement, or even more of the same movement. So that's kind of quite a complex subject, but it is important to have tissues that are hydrated and mobile enough around the joints to be able to move the joints freely through a full range of motion in all planes of motion. And that's kind of where I start with most people, because if you haven't got that, you'll be unbalanced in your running. Your stride on one side might be shorter than the other. You'll be compensating everywhere up the system. You might not be getting the hip extension that is required for efficient running. I just think about it, if you just get a couple of millimeters more hip extension, genuine hip extension, then that adds up enormously, and it doesn't take a lot to get that, really. It's just moving the right things in the right way. And again, it's not about more strength. So people think, well, to get more hip extension, I need to have a stronger glutes. Well, that's not really the whole story, because in order to be able to use the glute, you need to be able to load up the feet and the psoas and everything up the chain. So it's not just about strengthening in isolation, because that will make things more imbalanced rather than getting the kind of functional strength in movement, which is what we want for running. Okay, so if you're curious about this, if you want to know how you can get more range of movement, not through static stretching but by movement, and mostly body weight stuff, very rarely using any machines or heavy weights, it's because it's not about strength, it's about elasticity and synchronicity and fluidity, and having a range of movement that is accessible in movement and not just in a static position on the ground or whatever. Okay, so those are my thoughts on that. We want to get faster, we want to get stronger for sure, but it needs to be functional, and it needs to be built on the foundations of a full range of movement and being able to access all positions. Okay, so bye for now. It's like my video, subscribe to the channel and the usual stuff. This is Dave signing off from Roads to Freedom.